Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we are back in War Thunder once again talking about the summer landing event, and what I'm going to go through here is lineups which I will be using for the event. Now generally for the event it's normally best to use meta lineups just because it's a little bit easier to do. It'll mean that you have more chance of getting the challenges done quicker and therefore have more time to do other things. Normally that's what I would do. I'm thinking about maybe this time just playing normally and seeing how it goes with it, but in this video we'll talk about the lineups that I will use if push comes to shove and have to go meta bashing. When it comes to America, the main one that I've used for many years is this 5-3 lineup. Even though it's gone up in BR several times, it used to be 4-7, now it's 5-3, it's still a banger of a lineup with the two M4A3E2 jumbos, and then also the M4A276, which gives you the firepower that is required to be able to be useful. The other thing you can also add into this lineup is some really good, basically really good planes, which are great for ground striking and then going after the enemy in an air superiority role. You can throw in the P-47s, you can throw in the P-51s, and basically the way that you play these things is you bring along the bomb loads like this, get a guaranteed kill on the bottom, and then after that what you do is you play air defense, and then you can easily get your 4 kills. They're really good for doing this. If you don't have the Cobra King, you can swap it out for the M4A176. It does exactly the same job as we've talked about with the M4A2, and it really works really well. There's also the 5-7 lineup you can bring if you want. The M18, now that it's a light tank and a scout, it now has much more use, even though it already had a ton of use. You can bring in the 76 M4A3 alongside that, and also the M36 Slugger, which is a really good 90mm and will sort you out in up tiers pretty well. You can also at 5-7 bring in some really good planes as well. You can bring in the P-47N and also the Muller or the AD2 for that extra bomb support if you require. All of these lineups are fantastic. They work really well and give you everything you're looking for if you follow the tips and tricks that I talked about yesterday. When it comes to Germany, Germany has some pretty stellar lineups as well around similar BRs. The 5-3 lineup, for example, is incredibly good nowadays with the Tiger H1 and the Panther D, and then you can throw in the Nashorn, but I would say bring in the Panzer 470 instead. If you feel a little bit more confident with AA, make sure to bring in an Ostwind 2, which is also 5-3 at the moment. Then, on top of that, you can bring in some pretty stellar options when it comes to planes. You can bring in stuff like BF-109s if you want to play air superiority. You can bring in the B6R3, which is a really good ground pounder and generally can work incredibly well for you, and that is definitely an option to have a look at. The 5-7 lineup is pretty similar to it, apart from you go up slightly. So the Tiger E once again, and then the Panther A you throw in, and then the Ostwind once again, or the Panzer 470, or the Waffenträger, depending on what fits your playstyle the best. These work incredibly well, and once again with the similar planes, you'll be able to do the tank challenges and the air challenges pretty easy. The other lineup which is worth considering if you have a little bit of a higher BR for Germany is 9-0. The Leopard 1A5, and then the M48 Super, the TAM, and also stuff like the Gepard. Then you can bring in stuff like the G91R3, and that can easily do your air task and with the Nords. And then also you can bring in something like a MiG-15 BIS if you want for air superiority, but the G91R3 does both jobs really, really well. So that's another lineup to think about if you're playing high tier. Generally I'd say stay away from high tier during these events, but if you're more comfortable with it, that would be a lineup I would look at. 8-7 is also very strong with the A1A1 and the TAM. Just got to watch out for up tiers in that sense. For the Soviets, there's only really one lineup that I'm thinking of doing, and that's the 4-3-1. And the 4-3-1 is really, really good. The KV-1 ZIS-5 at its tier or down tiered is a very strong vehicle, works incredibly well. Because of the fact that it has some dodgy armor, and also its M6mm penetrates pretty much anything that comes near. The only issue with a vehicle like this is if it gets up tiered, tiered, when its gun becomes a little bit less useful. Then you've got stuff like the Su-85, which can counter that. It has the 85mm, works incredibly well, and can push you around and do pretty good. If you're struggling to get into planes, you bring the Su-57 out. You can scout in this thing, and also it's very fast. You can also sit it in very obscure areas, so generally people just wander past you, and you can be able to kill them. Then the Ac-9T for that air superiority / ground superiority role that we've talked about. It's nice to have a plane that can do both. And the PE-8 because sometimes you get lucky with the 5,000 kilo bomb, and it just means that you can get the 4 targets done really quickly, or at least it can give you a good advantage as a team to try and win the battle. When it comes to Britain, there's a few lineups to have a look at. The first one is the 731 with the Carnarvon and Centurion, and then FV-4202. This is very strong on the ground, and also you do have really good ground pounder / air superiority fighters. So you can bring the Vampire with 2 1,000 pounders, the Attacker with 2 1,000 pounders as well, and this just creates a really nice 5-stack lineup. You know, stabilizers, APDS, decent armor on a lot of the British vehicles, and generally good mobility. Overall, this lineup's very good, and there's a reason why it kept going up in BR until it hit this point. The 7.7 lineup as well, Vickers MBT, Conch, and then also Centurion Mark 10. This works very well as well on top of all of this, and you can bring in pretty much the same planes once again. You just got to be a little bit more careful of radar guided AA, because that will be around the place. I don't think, oh no, you can bring in the Seahawk if you feel like it with the bombs, so you can maybe replace the Attacker with it. The other lineup for the British to consider is the 4.7 one with the Churchill Mark 7, the Avenger, and also the Sherman Firefly, and if you have the other Firefly you can replace the Avenger with it. This lineup is pretty tanky. Once again, it's a good mix of having a heavy which can take a lot of shots in the form of the Churchill, and then the Sherman Firefly can deal out the damage. So depending on what BR you're at, if you once again up-tiered or higher BR, it is normally better to bring a Firefly so you can deal with the larger targets, or if you're at your BR you can stroll ahead with the Churchill and go forth in that way. The general planes you run with this lineup is stuff like the Typhoon, because it has the 2,000 pounders on it, then also the Spitfire for the air superiority role, so therefore you can try and move to the situation and see what happens. You can also throw the Concept 3 into this lineup, which is a really powerful tank right now. It's a very good vehicle at 4.3, and I'm very surprised that it hasn't gone up in BR. It's got a really nice gun, really good mobility, and also scouting, meaning that getting into planes is a little bit easier. For Japan, you're a little bit strapped. The 4.7 lineup is always the one that I go to. The Cheeto Late, Cheeto, and then Chinu 2. You can do another lineup though if you want. If you don't have the Chinu 2, you can throw in the Chaffee. This will mean that you can scout, and once again it'll be a little bit easier to get into planes. The only issue with this lineup is the planes it has access to. You know, there isn't a ton of stuff which is great around the BR. Yeah, you have the B7A2 4.0 with the 800 kilo bomb, and kind of can play a defensive fighter role, but it's not the best. And you do have a lot of really good fighters which can shoot down a ton of planes, but they're not really going to have a presence when it comes to the ground side of things. So I don't think that's going to go too well. But this is a lineup definitely worth considering. And then also, if you are a person who is interested in higher tier, 8.7 is the way to go for Japan. The two Type 74s plus the Type 87 or the Type 89, depending on what you pick, all of this is a very nice mix of vehicles. And then also you can bring along stuff such as the F-30, which I believe gets bombs. Yes, it gets 2 1000s, and then also maybe an R2Y2, but generally the air presence for Japan isn't as good as the ground presence. For China, you've got a few lineups you can bring. The first one is my go-to, the 5.7 lineup. You've got the M18, the T-3485, the other T-3485 as well, plus the M36 that you can bring in, the IS-2 if you feel feel like having a little bit of a donk show. The M42 is in the house as well, and also the Hong Kong to give you a little bit more. When it comes to AA, the PT-76, if you're a masochist, there's a ton of really good options when it comes to China 5.7, and it's backed up with some really good planes. The P-51K, which is very similar to the P-51D, so get your bombs off, kill something, and then get 3 air kills, or maybe 1 AA and 2 air kills. You can do a really good job with this thing. The Tu-2, if you are spawning the Hellcat, which of course is a light tank, get some scouts off, get a cap, and you can get in a plane before the enemy team gets in a plane. This is super strong. 2 500s which drop independently, and then 1,000 kilo bomb in the center. You can easily get 3 bomb drops off in this thing, and that means that you only need 1 extra kill to be able to get your 4 done in aircraft. So that's why I really like bringing the Tu-2. It isn't great for every area. If, you know, it's midway through the battle or the enemy has a bunch of planes up, then the P-51K is obviously the way to go. But this is my go-to lineup for these events. 8.0 is also very strong when it comes to China, especially with the WZ-305. If you have the HEVT on this, the DKY-1, there's going to be a lot of planes flying around the place and at this BR, so the WZ-305 can actually work wonders at taking them out and being able to win you the match. The Type 59 and 69 are also very strong stabilized vehicles. They work incredibly well, and also another lineup which is very strong is the you can bring in the PTLO2 in this lineup too, so if you want to get in planes like these two, it's very much easier to do as well. The 8.7 lineup is great as well. PTZ-89, ZTZ-59D1, M60 A3 TTS, or you can bring in the PTLO2 if you have the APF SDS on it, because the APF SDS is pretty strong. You just got to be a little bit careful of the this lineup, because it doesn't really have good aircraft support, is the way to put it. It has the J2 with some rockets, but it's not the best. And it has the F30, which once again has access to the 2,000 pounders. But at this BR, you run into radar guided AA, you run into a lot of G91s. It's not too fun in that regard. So for me, I would stick to 8.0 more than 8.7 if you're going to do that. For Italy, 9.0 is also very strong, as you see with the OF40 Mark II, Leopard 1A5 and Centauro, and also the R1 or the CL13. Both of them make a presence, but if you have the G91R4, of course bring that in, because it has access to the Nords, and the Nords are very powerful. The overall look at the Italians, it's either this lineup, which is very strong, or the lower lineup, which is actually the 4.0 lineup, so Stug 3G, Breda 501, and also M4A4. This is a little bit of an odd lineup. You can throw in the Semaventa if you want to try and keep it at 3.7, and then maybe put in the M4 hybrid. But generally, you will find this lineup to be useful because there's big guns, a lot of damage, and a little bit of armor too. The aircraft portion, there is actually some really nice ones to bring in. The 2001, even though it's slightly low BR, you get a 250 kilo, which is very useful. You can also bring in the SM91, which gets 6 100s, which drops 2 at a time, so you basically get 3 bomb drops. It also has 6 20mm on the top of it, so you can do a ton of damage with them. You could also do the SM92 if you want. SM92 has a slightly better bomb load in the form of 2 500s, which I believe drop independently, so that could also be really useful at 4.0. Those would be the lineups I go for Italy. When it comes to France, 5.3 once again, just like the Americans. The M4A4 SA50, this thing has a ridiculously good gun on it, and can easily do well at 5.3. The Jumbo, once again, same reason for Americans, and the ARL 44, which gives you kind of a mix. It gives you decent armor and also a very good penetrating gun. The other lineup for France, which is really good, is the 3.7 one that you can see here. So the AMX-13, the M4A4, and the RL-44 ACL-1. These work really well in tandem together. It's the one that I go for when trying to get first places or 2000s for France, because you can also throw in stuff like the MB-157, which isn't great, but it's alright. right, and maybe if you up-tier it slightly, the P63. In the 5-3 lineup, when it comes to planes, you do have a decent amount of choices, but they are a little bit low BR for the area. So the F6F5N with the Tiny Tims or the bombs, and then also the P63C5 with the 3 500s that gets 2 bomb drops, so that's kind of useful as well. And then for Sweden, when it comes to ground and air, the options are a little bit all over the place. You've got 7.7, which is very strong for Sweden, STRV-81, 101, and STRV-103A. After the changes to the STRV-103, it feels a lot better to use. The IKV-91 is also incredibly strong, and the OOSH is a little bit of fun. So you could do that lineup. You obviously have the 11.0 lineup, but that's really, really strong for Sweden. But when it comes to lower BR stuff, you're kind of screwed. You only really have the 4.0 lineup with the PVKV2 and the PVKV-M43 and the L62, but this lineup really weighs on the PVKV2. You have to do well with this machine in order for this lineup to work, and you can do really well in it. The PVKV2 is a very strong vehicle, but also at the same time, if you are relying on a vehicle that can easily get artilleried or killed by planes, it's normally not a great deal. The other thing is at 4.0 you do have the A21 A3, and this has access to some really good rockets in the form of these ones, the M49As, and the M49As have really good pen, and as long as you're accurate with them, because if you have a look at the way that they're mounted like centrally on the vehicle, so it's, oh no, never mind, I'm thinking of the other one. So they're not mounted centrally, the bomb is mounted centrally. If I do this, okay, so they're mounted on the sides. Yeah, I'm thinking of the other one. Yeah, so you're gonna have to be accurate with these things to actually make it work, basically, is the way to sort it out. And if you're able to do that, then you can do great in these things. They're also really good superiority fighters, the J21 and the A21, so that could work pretty well. Overall, Sweden's a little bit of a rough one compared to other nations, but you can still do it with this nation. And then when it comes to naval forces, I normally stick with the same stuff over and over again because their BRs don't change too much, and I obviously do it in an arcade. The 3.0 lineup for America is very strong with the A36 and the F6F5. The F6S5 obviously has access to a torpedo, so you can try and get the torpedo kills with it. And you don't really want to take the Tucumcari. Instead, what you want to do is you want to bring in the PT565, which is basically a Thunderbolt, but slightly worse. The PT59 is your main gunslinger, and this is just a really fast lineup that you can run around, capture zones, do a ton of damage, and have a lot of fun with. That's why I like this lineup, and it's always going to be one of the major ones that I go to when it comes to these events. You obviously can also do some other lineups for America, which are also quite strong. 5.0 with the Trenton and the Raleigh and the Somers is very good. The Porter at 4.7 is in a really nice place along with the Sumner, so that will work too. When it comes to Germany, the one that I would go for is the 4.3 Eric Glace or the Anton Schmidt and the Z43. These are all very capable destroyers with good reloads on the 127mm. They do a lot of damage, and if you have the Z25 with the 150s, you can throw them in too. Coastal fleet wise, remember you can do rank 2 for Germany, so you can go, or rank 2 for any nation, so you can go as low as this. I would say this lineup's pretty good with the 2 SF40s and the S100. Just understand you're going to get bombed a lot when it comes to the SF40s. For the USSR, I would say the projects are definitely a thing to look at. The 3.0 lineup of the BMO, the Groza, and the PR191, very powerful. It's very hard to kill the Groza now at 3.0 with a lot of the vehicles that are there. And then when it comes to the blue water stuff, I unfortunately don't have enough experience with it, so I'm not sure at all, really. When it comes to Britain, 4.3 is obviously the way to go. You know, you have all of these vehicles that are at 4.3, and they're all very powerful. Really good quick firing guns, a lot of damage from them, and generally have good AA support as well. So you can shoot down planes who are trying to torpedo you. And also at 4.3, if you have a look at aviation, there are a lot of options to get torpedo kills on. You know, there's stuff like the Welly that you could bring in if you really want to. And then also you have, I believe it's the Hellcat somewhere. Because remember, you can use, well, you have the Avenger you could use. You can use planes of rank 2 in Naval to be able to get these stuff done. I can't find the plane right now. But yeah, you do have options for torpedoes. You also have, of course, your boy Beaufighter, which you can bring in, which works very well. For the coastal side of things, I would say 2.3 is probably the way to go for this. 2.3, 2.7. The stuff such as the Dark Aggressor is a very fun vehicle to use. The Grey Fox at 3.0 is incredibly powerful, works really well alongside some of the other machines that are on the BR. The fair miles are generally useless, so don't bother with them. Then when it comes to the Japanese, the 4.7 lineup is the one to go for. It's not very strong though. It's a lot of cruisers. The Akizuki is nice, but took a big hit when they changed destroyer DMs. The Isuzu is a really bad cruiser. The Carcos are also really bad. Generally, I would stay away from the Blue Water Fleet unless you want to do torp kills. Then obviously you use the Shimakaze. The Shimakaze is really good for torp kills, but after the nerf to torpedoes in the last update, we'll have to see how that goes. Coastal Fleet wise, once again, not in a great place. Pretty much you've got the 2.3 lineup with the Type K3 and the K7 with the 40mm on the front, which do dish out a lot of damage. That's pretty much all you've got when it comes to this stuff. You do have some good planes though. You know, the B7 you can run with the Blue Water stuff, and also the B6 if you feel like it. Those are really good for torpedo kills. And then Italy, when it comes to the Blue Water side, 4.7, it has to be 4.7. 4.7 is a very strong BR for Italy. The Etna, then the Bartolomeo Colleoni, Attilio Regolo, and then obviously the Trento. If you're going to pick out of these, pick the Trento, Regolo, and also Colleoni. The Etna has a few issues with it when it comes to its turrets and also its general survivability. But yeah, this is the lineup you go for. It's an incredibly strong one, works really well if you want to dish out damage and also kill stuff. Coastal Fleet wise, you know, Sayetsa is very strong, Freccia is also very strong, but you can maybe use this time to maybe spade out some of these vehicles if you want to. None of these really leap off the page as good vehicles. A lot of them don't have a lot of survivability and also don't have great guns. So those are going to be the lineups that I'm going to be using for the summer event. Hopefully it goes well. Good luck to you, and I will see you next time. I'd like to thank BRFC, Swollen Ostrich, Teddy, John Ryman, Universe, Conte Baraka, Eugens Terry, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Lafouche, Barine, and Samuel Schlick for supporting the channel.